actually find all these people? Where do they look? Our source details a pretty multifaceted strategy for sourcing candidates, I have to say.
Multifaceted is the right word. They seem to utilize a mix of strategies to reach as many potential candidates as possible. The obvious starting point, of course, is the big job portals. We're talking about Naukri, LinkedIn, Shine, Monster, these all names you'd recognize. Those platforms cast a really wide net, which is essential when you need volume.
You need that constant flow of applicants coming in.
Exactly. But then they also tap into more localized channels, which I found quite interesting. They use local agencies, they encourage employee referrals, which can be incredibly effective, especially for specialized roles.
I imagine that also helps build a sense of trust right from the start. If someone is being referred by an existing employee, they already have a kind of vouch for their character and work ethic.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the power of social media.
Yeah.
They mentioned utilizing platforms like Facebook and even WhatsApp groups for recruitment. It might seem a bit informal, but in this industry, it can be surprisingly effective, especially for reaching specific demographics or communities.
Right. And if they need to onboard a large number of people quickly, like for a major project or a new client, campus recruitment is another avenue they use, which makes sense. You often see that for entry-level positions.
Definitely. It's a great way to connect with a large pool of potential candidates who are just entering the workforce.
Yeah.
But once they have that initial pool, that's when the screening process really kicks in.
Right. So how does that work? How do they sift through all those applications and decide who to actually interview?
Well, they start with resume screening, which is, I think, pretty standard practice. They look for specific skills, experience that matches the client's needs, the usual stuff. And then after that initial screening, they move on to interviews. Telephone interviews first to quickly gauge suitability, and then, for promising candidates, the more in-depth in-person interviews.
Now, the document actually places a lot of emphasis on background verification, which is understandable. I mean, especially in security and hospitality roles, I guess knowing who you're hiring is absolutely critical.
Absolutely. Background checks are non-negotiable in this industry. For security personnel, they need to do police verification. I mean, that's just common sense, right? You need to be sure that the person guarding a client's premises or protecting their assets is trustworthy and has a clean record. And for hospitality roles, where you're dealing directly with customers, they place a huge emphasis on reference checks. It's about gauging not just skills, but also personality, demeanor, their ability to handle customer interactions effectively.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so after the background checks, they've got their top candidates. What happens next? It's time to extend the offer, right?
Yep. They finalize their selections, which sometimes includes having the client interview the candidate as well. This is particularly common for specialized or high-level roles, just to ensure that the candidate is a good fit for the client's specific needs. Then they issue the offer letter, formalize the employment contract, and they also collect all the necessary documentation. Aadhaar cards, PAN cards for tax purposes, educational certificates, experience letters. It's all about building that solid foundation for their employee records.
Right, and that brings us to onboarding. What does the document say about that process? It's more than just a welcome packet and a quick tour of the office, right?
Oh, much more. It's about setting up those new hires for success, making sure they feel comfortable, informed, and prepared for the work ahead. They ensure the new employees understand the company's policies, the expected code of conduct, which is especially important in client-facing roles. There's a strong emphasis on workplace safety and hygiene training, particularly for those in hospitality and cleaning services, which makes perfect sense given the nature of those jobs. Then there's the practical stuff, providing them with uniforms, ID cards, any tools or equipment they might need to perform their specific tasks. And for those being placed at client sites, introductions to the client representatives and their direct supervisors are really important. It's all about making that transition smooth and setting them up for a successful start.
So we've got our new hires trained, onboarded, and out in the field. But what about all the behind-the-scenes stuff? The paperwork, the legal requirements, all of that. Employee documentation and compliance. The document calls it avoiding risky business.
And it is. Meticulous record-keeping, both digital and physical copies. It's not just about ticking boxes. It's about protecting the business from legal and operational risks down the line. You need that paper trail. They keep records of all the essential personal details, Aadhaar numbers, PAN numbers, bank information for salaries, copies of the employment contracts, training certificates, those background verification reports we talked about earlier.
And compliance with labor laws, that must be a whole other ballgame, especially when you're managing so many employees across different locations and roles.
Absolutely. Compliance is non-negotiable, and it's complex. They emphasize registering employees under the relevant statutory bodies, which includes things like PF, the Provident Fund, ESI, which is the Employee State Insurance Scheme. Then you've got PT, professional tax, gratuity. These are all legal obligations.
So those are the key ones to be aware of.
Yeah, definitely the main ones. And they also need to stay on top of all the documentation related to labor laws in general, and then the specific agreements that govern contract staffing. It's all about ensuring that they're operating within a legal framework, both for their own internal employees and the larger outsourced workforce.
The document specifically mentions POSH, which is the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Compliance Training. I've noticed that that's becoming more and more of a focus point across industries.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about ticking a box. It's about creating a safe and inclusive work environment for everyone.
Hmm.
And POSH training, setting up those internal complaints committees, or ICCs as they're often called, it's becoming standard practice.
Right. Moving on, I think we need to talk about something that's, well, at the top of everyone's mind, payroll and benefits. So the document refers to it as the foundation of trust, which I thought was interesting.
It's a good way to put it. Ensuring that salaries are processed accurately, on time, that tax deductions are handled correctly, and that benefits are administered effectively. That's fundamental to building a solid relationship with your employees. You mess that up, and you lose their trust pretty quickly.
For sure. So how does the salary calculation process actually work in these businesses?
Well, it starts with accurate attendance and shift reports, of course. Then they calculate the salary based on several things: the basic pay, any overtime hours, shift allowances, bonuses, incentives they might have earned. They use a mix of bank transfers, which is more common these days, and sometimes even cash payments in certain situations.
And what about all the deductions that employees see on their pay slips? What are the main ones they need to be aware of?
The statutory deductions. Those include contributions to PF, the Provident Fund, ESI, professional tax, and of course income tax, which is deducted at source, or TDS as it's called. But it's not just about deducting the money. They also need to make sure they're remitting these funds to the right government bodies and filing all those monthly, quarterly, and yearly statutory returns.
So there's quite a bit of administrative work involved.
Oh, tons. They also handle reimbursements for work-related expenses like travel, food, uniforms. And then you have the design of incentive schemes, which is a whole other area of expertise. And of course, there's the management of employee benefits like group insurance, medical benefits, gratuity plans. It's a whole package.
Okay, moving on to another key aspect, training and development. The document says it directly impacts service quality and client satisfaction, which seems pretty straightforward.
Right, especially in these service-driven sectors. Training is essential, and they seem to have a well-structured approach to it. There's pre-deployment training, which is tailored to specific roles, hospitality